So I would like to call on 𝐍𝐚𝐭𝐢𝐨, as she will be presenting to all of you our findings of the National Assembly observation that we did yesterday. Ms. 𝐍𝐚𝐽, you're welcome. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon and welcome to the EWC Information Center and our preliminary report for the elections, for the 2020 National Assembly elections. For immediate release, 2022 National Assembly elections preliminary statement. The Elections Watch Committee is a partnership of 3 different organizations with different expertise and backgrounds: Peace Ambassadors de Gambia, Activista de Gambia, and the National Youth Parliament de Gambia, collaborating to observe the electoral process in the Gambia. EWC's observation of the 2022 Assembly elections built on EWC's observation of the 2021 presidential election processes, such as voter registration, the display of provisional list of voters, the candidate nomination, the campaign period, and the 2021 presidential election day. The EWC have observed the pre-election period, which include candidate nomination and campaign, as well as 9th April election day process at polling streams within all constituencies in the Gambia. Introduction. This preliminary statement is based on reports that the Elections Watch Committee has received from 300 stationary observers deployed to polling streams proportionally nationwide by the end of the day on 9th April 2022. The statement also covers reports received from collation centers, observers deployed at constituency and regional collation centers. On the 9th April, the EWC deployed 410 trained and accredited election day observers. This includes 300 stationary observers, 50 mobile observers, 53 constituency supervisors, and 7 regional coordinators. The 300 polling stream observers have been systematically deployed based on a proportional distribution by constituency. This means that the proportion of Election Watch stationary observers closely match the overall proportion of IEC polling streams in each constituency and administrative area. This proportional deployment enables the EWC to comment on the process nationally, drawing on data points from every constituency across the country. Appendix A provides a breakdown of the distribution of observed polling streams by administrative area. The EWC further deploys observers to the IEC collation centers to observe this process. EWC have observed all key aspects of the electoral process, beginning from political party candidate nomination and the campaign period. At each stage of the observation, the EWC released its findings about the respective process and issue recommendations to election stakeholders. On the 17th March 2022, the EWC released its update on candidate nomination process. On the 17th March 2022, EWC released its update on the candidate nomination process. On the 28th March and 8th April, the EWC released its update on findings on campaign period, reflecting on the observation by the 53 constituency and 7 regional observers. Overall, observers reported that the campaign period was peaceful and political parties and candidates mobilized across the country with no restriction, and civic and voter education efforts ramped up as the period progressed. However, the EWC also noted violations of the campaign code of ethics, including the use of government resources such as government vehicles and vote buying. Use of state resources and vote buying increase an unlevel playing field between candidates and dilute the premise that political campaigns should be contested based on candidates' programs. On election day, the EWC released a midday update on the setup and opening process. EWC observers noted that polling stations mostly opened on time, had all essential materials, and party agents as well as security forces were present. However, EWC noted a relatively high number of polling streams not accessible to people with disability, as well as the elderly. In three instances, political parties' agents demanded the count of ballot tokens before voting began. This preliminary statement focuses on voting, closing, and counting processes. It also reflects reports from EWC's observers deployed to observe the collation process conducted at collation centers located in each region. EWC observers will continue to observe in the post-electoral period. Key findings. Based on reports from the elections which observers deployed on polling streams in all 53 constituencies, Gambians peacefully participate in National Assembly elections and face few challenges in casting their votes. The IEC polling officials generally follow procedures during the voting, closing, and counting process. Party agents were present in all polling streams observed by EWC observers and did not object to the count in nearly all observed locations. However, COVID-19 protocols were largely not followed by IEC officials and voters. And the voting process. Election watch observers monitor the entire election day process at their assigned polling streams, starting from setup, voting, and continued throughout closing and counting process. They reported in near real time using unique observation checklists and quoted messages to a central database at the EWC's National Information Center. Within their polling streams, election watch observers witnessed IEC staff generally follow voting procedures. Election watch observers in nearly all polling streams observed reported that pregnant women, physically challenged, and elderly voters were given priority to vote and were assessed from someone of their choice when requested. Election watch observers reported that the IEC polling officials generally followed procedures. In nearly all polling stations observed, voters were asked to present their voter's card before being allowed to vote. The finger of every voter was marked with indelible ink, and every voter received only one token in all polling streams observed, consistent with the electoral law. In nearly all polling streams observed, voters were able to cast their vote in secret. Adherence to the COVID-19 protocol, to the COVID-19 safety protocols. EWC reported low level of messaging and adherence to the COVID-19 health and safety protocols during the campaign period, as well as on election day. EWC observed that all eligible voters were allowed to vote as mandated by the IEC, regardless to the COVID-19 safety protocol. For the 9th April elections, EWC observers noted inconsistent adherence to the COVID-19 safety protocols. 49 of election watch observers noted that IEC officials wear face masks throughout the day. Observers reported that all voters wore a face mask in only 2% of observed polling streams. In 24% of streams, none of the voters wore face masks. In addition, only 24% of polling streams observed by election watch observers have sufficient social distancing throughout the day. Closing and counting process. 99% of polling stations observed closed on time, and in all polling streams, observed voters still in the queue at 5 p.m. were able to cast their vote. In most polling streams observed by the EWC, IEC officials generally followed closing and counting procedures. In 99% of polling streams observed, the presiding officer sealed the entry to the ballot drums at the end of the voting. Election watch observers noted that the presiding officer counted unused ballot tokens and returned the tokens to the SAC in 95% of polling streams observed. After the completion of counting, the presiding officer in 99% of the polling streams returned the ballot tokens to their respective box and affixed the seals. In 99% of polling streams observed, all sensitive materials such as the close of poll report and counting form were sealed in an envelope and signed by the presiding officer and party agents present. In all of the polling streams observed, Election Watch reported that the presiding officer pasted a copy of the count form on the wall of the polling stream. Party agents. Party agents vigilantly monitored the entire process, including setup, voting, closing, and counting. All observed polling stream has at least one party agent during the voting, closing, and counting process. In particular, party agents from GDC, NPP, UDP, PDYS, and independent candidates were present throughout the day at most polling streams observed by the EWC. Party agents levied an objection to the close of poll report in only 1% of observed polling stream, and to the count form in only one observed polling stream. This demonstrates the party agents did not challenge the counting process in nearly all polling streams observed. Party agents continue to be present at the collation centers as well. Critical incidents. During the voting, closing, and counting process, the Election Watch observers reported some incidents that occur at their assigned stream. No incidents were serious or severely disrupt the electoral process. As noted in the EWC midday statement, Election Watch observers reported 4 incidents related to disagreement between party agents and polling officials over the counting of ballot tokens, which delayed the start of voting, as well as were 6 reports of campaigning by political parties or candidates. In one polling station in Banjul North, the observer witnessed an argument between party supporters and later between 2 candidates that resulted in the police being called to disperse the crowd. In another notable incident, an observer heard of an incident in Kerewan where UDP supporters were arrested for preventing eligible voters from voting. Collation process. EWC deployed its observers to all 7 regional collation centers to observe the collation process at the constituency level and receive reports from 52 of 53 constituencies. All EWC observers and party agents were permitted to access and observe the collation centers. In 8 constituencies, observers noted that there were discrepancies identified in the polling station count forms that were corrected during the collation process. The collation process was not postponed or interrupted at any time in any collation center observed by the EWC, and all polling station results were included in the collation result as all centers observed. While party agents were present at nearly all collation centers, the collated result form was not signed by all party agents present in 5 cases, and a copy not given to all present party agents in 19 out of 52 constituencies. Preliminary recommendations. To political parties and candidates: utilize the prescribed legal process to pursue any complaint or grievances. For future elections, ensure that party agents are trained on electoral procedures and understand their role in observing the voting and the counting process. To the IEC, publicly provide polling stream rival result in a machine-readable format in a timely manner as a measure of transparency. This includes the results from presidential elections which have still not been published on the IEC's website. Clarify and communicate collation procedures and locations in more timely manner to ensure observers are able to fulfill their role in observing the process. Reconsider the process for allowing those on official duty to vote during National Assembly elections. This includes security officers, polling officers assigned to polling stations assignment, as well as observers, the media and party agents participating in the election process. And so all polling locations are accessible to all voters, particularly to the elderly and persons with disability. In addition, take additional measures to ensure the process make accessible, such as reading materials for the hearing impaired and listing the candidates' names in Braille on ballot drums. To the media, continue to demonstrate professionalism in its reportage and ensure citizens continue to receive accurate information about the election process. To the security forces, continue to demonstrate neutrality and professionalism in dealing with election-related matters. The Election Work Committee will subsequently release a comprehensive observation report that will capture recommendations for future electoral processes. About the Elections Work Committee. The Elections Work Committee is a partnership of 3 organizations and other network members with different expertise and background, collaborating to observe elections in the Gambia. The Elections Work Committee includes activists of the Gambia and the National Youth Parliament. This committee is a decision-making body on all matters related to the 2022 National Assembly Elections Watch Project. PAG serves as the secretariat of the committee. The Elections Watch Project is being financed with assistance from the...
At this point, I believe we all have a common understanding of what we observed as a committee on the elections yesterday. We will take in any questions, comments, or contributions. So if you want to speak, you could just raise up your hand and I'll bring the mic to you, please. Thank you.
Hello? Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for that excellent briefing. My name is Patrick McCarthy. I'm the UN Peace and Development Advisor in the Office of the Resident Coordinator here in the Gambia. I'd just like to commend the Elections Watch Committee for the highly professional way that you've conducted yourself over the last couple of days, but even before that, during the monitoring of the campaign period, and the way that you've been sharing information with all stakeholders on this extremely important election. So I'm very appreciative of that, first of all. But my question is actually a broader question about, more generally, how civil society has approached the observation of the election. Because I note that we have 3 main centers of civil society observation, not only the Elections Watch Committee, but also the CSO Coalition, and Gambia participates as well, operating, if you like, 3 parallel observation efforts. And my question is, why have you chosen to observe the elections in this way? I can see advantages and disadvantages to doing it separately and doing it together, but I'd like to hear your thinking. And whether you think in future it might be worth considering a single civil society observation effort, which would allow you to cover many more polling stations and polling streams than you did individually this time. Because I think, based on my rough count, if you take all of the 3 civil society observation initiatives together, you have between you close to, I think, 1,000 observers. And if those were spread around as a single initiative, you would be able to cover a lot more ground. So I'm wondering just what's the rationale for the way this was organized this time? And do you think you've learned any lessons for the next observation effort? Thanks.
Thank you very much. So do we take questions first and then you answer?
Thanks a lot to the African Union misuse of government resources contrary to the election regulations. What I want to know is, as Elections Watch, where do you come in to make sure that that is rectified even?
I didn't have any questions. We have two. We have three. Okay, I take five. Any answers?
Thank you so much. I am Pamodi Jam, journalist reporting for CTV Africa. I mean, yesterday we attended a press conference by Gambia Participate, and they observed influence of voter choice, like giving money for people to vote for MPP. So, and you also observe vote buying. So I just want to know if the scenarios are the same, or how well they're able to buy votes. How was it done, actually?
Do you have one more before anyone will start answering? So I guess we'll start answering then. Or do you have one?
Thank you very much. My name is Iyun from the Commonwealth. My question really is about implementation of the recommendations. You've made very good recommendations. How did you engage the various stakeholders, in the implementation process in the post-election period? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Since we have 5 questions now, I'll hand it to the members of the table to answer the questions.
Thank you very much for those wonderful questions. Starting with, according to the way they have been asked, the first one from you and Mr. McCarthy, why are we observing in different ways? The 3 organizations, let me say, the 3 bodies, the CSO Coalition, the Gambia Participate, and the Elections Watch Committee, all observe independently. And since we are all running different projects, we've noted that we can collaborate, and through collaboration we can cover more grounds. However, when we started the discussions, this was sometime in late November, there was not enough time for us to synchronize our various instruments that we use for observation efforts. The Elections Watch Committee is using an Apollo application which set criteria that we look out for. The Gambia Participates is also using another platform, one of which is the Marble app. You have the CSO Coalition also using their own platform. So there was not enough time for the 3 organizations to merge the 3 platforms together. As such, we agreed as a team. Can we have that coordination meeting between and among ourselves, wherein the Elections Watch Committee is deploying a stationary observer. Gambia Participants don't have a stationary observer in those particular polling stations. And with our method of receiving information, our stationary observers are deployed at the exact polling station that they are voting at. And Gambia Participate is also sending observers in almost where they are registered for their stationary observers. So with the grounds that we're covering, even though we did not have a single reporting format, but it's like our observers, it's almost near impossible to have stationary observers in the same voting center. So we almost covered the same ground even if we come together. Where we have the very similar areas is where our mobile observers, because they are moving from one center to another, they come in contact in most of the centers, and we equally visit each other, and that applies to the CSO Coalition. And even before the parliamentary elections, we had another engagement, that was the coordination meeting, where we all identified focal persons in the event that we have issues we want to clarify, most especially on critical incidences. Before we issue reports, we can be able to collaborate and coordinate among ourselves, so we will be able to have that cross path, where not only the media and the international observers, but ourselves will be struggling. Who do we go to? So we improve on that. But we've seen the challenge. I'm sorry, there is some time before the next elections in the local government. We'll still continue on with the leadership's engagement to see how best can we better coordinate between and among ourselves to make sure that we cover, if not 100% of the polling stations, but at least we match up to that 90-95%, so our reports can be that representative. The second question, while observing, okay, I've taken that one, and the lessons learned. The second one is from the AUU, voter-tone, why do we concentrate on that part? Mainly with the observation checklist, it's focusing onto the voter, because what the root IEC is a referee controlling the game between the political parties and the voters as the players. So we want to see how that process is being transparent. That's why we focus most of the questions on the voters and how well those voters that are coming in to either determine the credibility, the good turnout, and the accessibility of the exercise are being guaranteed or provided on the day. So that's why most of the questions that we are centering, or the checklist, are centered on the voters coming in. However, there are some few questions that are also centered on the procedure, on the IEC. How are they regulating themselves by virtue of the rules, the Electoral Act? The political parties, how are they comporting themselves during that environment? But largely is to the voter, because they are the primary duty bearers of the whole electoral cycle. That's why our message is being centered on them keenly. And on Her Excellency's question, the use of government resources, how do we get into, from our observations, we've flagged this from campaign areas, mainly with the government resources, most especially the use of government vehicles have been flagged in almost all the reports. And this is not unique to only the Elections Watch Committee. Other observation groups have flagged it. And we've seen the continuous use of government resources in our political landscape. And how do we make sure this is stopped? As observers, we don't have the mandate, we don't have the resources and the implementing power to say we are going to stop, for example, those who are using it. All that we can do is to flag it up. Once it is happening, we put up the red flag that this is happening. And we've seen continuously the parties involved, or the parties that we've been coming up with follow-up press statements or media engagement to report our claims that they use the government resources or government vehicles. But this is a common practice that we have seen across. With the other question of buying of votes from Mr. Chan, I believe. The issue of buying of votes, we've also put that up, and nothing much has been done to that effect to curb it, because even up to yesterday, day before yesterday, that was during the cooling off period, we've seen political parties dishing out bags of rice and so on. Well, we are in the holy month of Ramadan. Somebody gave a very good